This is Barbara the Barbarian, Chapter 4, Part 9, Slavers with the Carriage of Slaves. The Amazons decided to camp outside of the metal relic instead of inside. They didn't like the prospect of being trapped. Frankly, Barbara was completely on board with that. She never liked the idea of confinement. Nancy extracted all the data she could before exiting the ship and parked herself by the small fire next to the dead tree. Barbara found a small piece of jagged metal and used it to cut at the flight suit. She liked the sleeves of the outfit the Amazons gave her, but didn't like the feel of it, so she strategically cut away parts on each outfit. She wanted to ask for a knife, but she didn't want to ask any of the Amazons, feeling that it could somehow make her look weak and reflect even worse on her. Vina gave Barbara a small metal blade when she saw her struggling with making a straight line. Barbara spoke the words, "Thank you," but in Vina's language, finally feeling comfortable enough. Vina started talking to Barbara, but she hardly knew what she was saying. She might catch a word here and there, but she couldn't follow the conversation. Nancy chimed in, giving her the shorthand, never bothering to take her eyes off of her device. "She says you're pretty and asked you to have sex." Barbara rolled her eyes. "She did not say that." Nancy shrugged. "If you say so." She mouthed as if she really didn't care if she believed her or not. Vina smiled as if waiting for Nancy to give her the translation of what Barbara said. Barbara looked around and smiled at Vina. She looked back to Nancy, who still hadn't stopped looking through her notes. "Tell her, I don't swing that way?" Barbara told Nancy. "Okie dokie," Nancy replied. When Nancy translated, Vina's face dropped, as if deflated. Barbara pat Vina on the shoulder in the most platonic way she could think of. "Why do all these chicks want to do me?" Barbara said to Nancy, not really expecting an answer. "You see any guys around here?" was all the response she got. Barbara couldn't deny that logic. "Tell her I'm into guys," the Miss Fitness contender said to Nancy to say to Vina. Vina waited for the translation, and when it came, she laughed. The Amazons overheard the conversation and chuckled a bit. They didn't seem as if they had anything to say about it otherwise, though. Barbara didn't look a gift horse in the mouth and tried to avoid that topic of conversation like the plague. "Why don't you ask her about the werewolf stuff and the wind breath?" she said to Nancy to get her to change the subject. Nancy looked down at her device, not really bothering with all the back and forth conversation that she was truly not invested in. She housed the look of a neutral third party that had on many occasions been the intermediary in conversations she didn't give a shit about. Nancy relayed Barbara's question without complaint. Vina's mood changed when she went into a long tirade. Her emotions changed several times as if she had mixed feelings about the things she was capable of. "She says the shaman is her mother, and she is destined to follow her path. She says that it is her tribe's god, Wind, that gives her the power to commune with the beast and talk to the winds," Nancy said, obviously editorializing a much longer conversation. "So it's magic then?" Barbara asked with the innocence of a child. Vina didn't wait for the translation. It was as if she somewhat understood that, or at least that part of it. The younger, smaller Amazon woman nodded vigorously. Vina spoke to Nancy, and now it was Barbara's turn to sit there quizzically waiting for her response. "She wants to know about your homeland," Nancy relayed. Barbara took a deep exhale as if she had a lot to get off her chest on the subject. She warmed her hands at the fire, then leaned on the dead log to relax. "It wasn't like this. There are a hell of a lot more people. We had the internet, TV, movies, books." Barbara listed, making herself homesick just by voicing the words. "Everything was
way easier and a lot less apocalyptic. We had phones and laws, freaking traffic light cameras, cars. Every day was not a fight to live. You could actually do things other than survive to the next night, Barbara said, and paused so that Nancy could translate. Vina smiled and nodded as if intrigued. The other Amazon scoffed openly. Danica, still recuperating from her stab wound, spoke to Nancy, who told Barbara, "Paradise for the weak." "Well, here is paradise for dykes," said Barbara, who immediately stopped Nancy. "Please don't tell her that." Nancy laughed, but caught herself before turning this little sit-down into a knife fight. Vina and Barbara spoke on for quite a while longer about each other's respective worlds. Barbara determined that Vina was a younger woman with something to prove to her tribe, seeing she was being groomed for a highly respected position. She told Vina about her life of performing and her love of fitness. Barbara explained to her much of her doubts and a few of her fears, but not so many that the others could hear them and judge her even more than they already had. In this world, it seemed as if magic and monsters were real, and even Dungeons and Dragons nerd fantasy were true here. Barbara slept light, but this night she didn't instantly expect to wake in her own bed. This world was starting to become her new reality. When the sun rose, Barbara woke. She heard the Amazons talking in hushed tones and packing their gear. Nancy was slumped over, sleeping, using her dog, Russ, as a pillow. Lena spoke to Vina, and the younger woman listened to the battle-torn Amazon as if she were imparting serious knowledge on her. Barbara did her best to stay out of the way of this exchange. Danica seemed noticeably better than she was the night before, but Ray and Bay stood on either side of her to hold her steady. They were obviously taking her back to the village, and Vina was obviously continuing on. They obviously wanted to talk Vina out of staying the course, but Barbara was starting to believe that her urge to be taken serious was stronger than her interest in helping her out. Vina watched as her sisters went back the way they came and disappeared into the forest. Her eyes lingered even after they were long gone, as if she were weighing her decisions. Vina turned around and saw Barbara watching her. She smiled. Barbara smiled. "I wish I could send you back so you wouldn't have to do this, but I really need you to help Vina," said Barbara, knowing she would not understand much of what she was saying. Vina seemed as if she understood well enough. The three walked through the forest for quite some time. Barbara smoked more than the other two ever so often, but neither were very chatty for the most part. "So, do you have telephones here?" said Barbara, attempting to figure out exactly where they were technology-wise. She intended to ask her every question she could possibly think to ask, seeing they surely had the time for it now. "Phones, yeah, they do exist, but people here haven't figured out how to do the frequency or wavelengths or some such nonsense. I remember a few years ago hearing that Hub tried to set up towers for phones, but abominations kept taking them down," Nancy explained. Barbara shook her head at the extreme amount of things she did not understand in that sentence. She decided to move on and see if she could figure out the rest of this through context clues. Spending a few days with a race of people she had no way of communicating with was beginning to make her very good at getting the gist of things. "Is this Earth? The planet, I mean?" Barbara asked, curious to know the answer. "No, it sounds familiar, but no. The planet's name is Decian," Nancy said matter-of-factly. Barbara kept a stiff upper lip, though she was unnerved at the possibility she was on an alien planet. She had already braced herself for it. "And the year? I guess you have a calendar, right?" Barbara asked, even if knowing the year was irrelevant. Knowing how many years of civilization there was may have given her some clue to something. "By Hub calendar, the year is 7102.
Nancy said. Vina paused and the others stopped walking. When she did, Vina said to Nancy something.
She sees a road and a vehicle approaching.
Nancy translated. The three laid down in high grass and watched the passage. Barbara hadn't even realized there was a road in the first place. Barbara saw horses pulling a cart. There were 2 riders in black sitting at the reins. Their cargo was women locked in bamboo cages like sullen canaries. The 2 riders' faces were covered with black scarves. As the cart passed, Barbara noticed the women inside were as naked as the day they were born.
"What is that about?"
Barbara asked Nancy.
"Slavers, looks like. Probably got those girls from Pierce. Looks like they're taking them towards Argonne, if I was guessing,"
said Nancy.
"Slaves? The fuck, Nancy? How is this cool?"
Barbara spoke with indignation. Vina rose up when the cart was completely out of view and said something to Nancy.
"They were probably taken from a sacked town or somewhere in the south,"
Nancy clarified.
"Aren't there any laws that prohibit this? Somebody has to be doing something about this."
Barbara spoke with urgency.
"See, the thing with that is, no. Nobody really does anything about it unless it's on their doorstep,"
Nancy explained.
"There isn't anybody we can tell then?"
Barbara asked.
"You can tell anyone you want, but having them do anything is the trick,"
Nancy said with far less enthusiasm than Barbara. Barbara looked at the cart that was a distant dot on a dirt road she just now discovered. Though she was curious who plowed the road, she didn't really have time to ask.
"We have to do it,"
Barbara said, scared at the very prospect of such a course of action.
"Do what?"
Nancy asked.
"We have to free those chicks in the cage,"
Barbara said, pointing down the road.
"This isn't like some sort of peace fest here. If we approach them, chances are we're going to have to kill them. You know that, right?"
Nancy said, making sure Barbara knew the stakes. Barbara nodded, though her courage came more from the idea of doing the right thing more than the actual mechanics of gutting a man.
"If I do this, we're even,"
Nancy said. Barbara nodded as if she completely understood the stakes.
"Ask Vina if she's down with this,"
Barbara said to Nancy. Vina smiled enthusiastically at Barbara's comment, giving her a thumbs up, not needing a translation. She was in for the long haul. Look for the next chapter of Barbara the Barbarian. Like and subscribe.